Welcome back to another MobileSentrix tips and tricks. My name is Derek, and today I'm going to be showing you two different repairs. Both have to do with pulled pads. Now these were two completely failed repair attempts. Both cases suffered pad loss, one on an Xbox, the other on a Nintendo Switch. There are a handful of ways to go about repairing pads. I'm going to talk about them in this video, and hopefully you learn something. Let's get started. Now here you can see the damage that ensued. Got some jumper wires here that are kind of in place still. You can see that they did a decent job at least getting them kind of on the traces. We have a few loose pads here, the grounding pads, but we do have here these 6 that stayed behind. Let's do this. Let's first start by cleaning up the solder. Let's clean up the area a little bit. I'm gonna try to get all the burnt flux out of the these little grooves here, the pads, and I'm gonna get rid of all of the solder that they tried to use to secure the HDMI on the back. They used a lot of solder. I'm not quite sure what it is, so I'm using some low melt solder to help mix with the solder to suck it all up, so that we can have some clean through holes when it comes time to put the HDMI back. And we'll clean off that burnt flux with some flux cleaner or isopropyl alcohol. Let's really clean that up nice. And now that I have this area clean, let me switch over to the Switch so you can see what damage we're working on there, and let's get started with that repair. Alright, taking a look at the damage that was done on this Nintendo Switch. We're missing 3 pads. And again here, let's start by adding some solder so that we can remove all of the old solder that's left on the board. You can see here we've got some of the legs broke off inside the through holes. We'll add flux around and add some solder paste. And let's go around quickly and put plenty of solder through these holes. I like to kind of push the tip of my iron down inside and really mix the factory solder with a low melt. This will really help in wicking and cleaning out those holes. Now we'll take some wick and we'll suck up all of the solder into the wick. And we'll clean up the area, get it nice and free of all of the flux so that we can work on fixing those pads. On a really clean surface for this. We'll drip some isopropyl alcohol in there and blow it away. And now taking a scalpel, a really nice new blade, I'm going to come in and scrape away at the trace here that's barely exposed. We don't want to remove it, we just need to scrape through that top green layer of board so that we can get down to it. And I'm going to be really careful because I really have barely any of that trace left here, so we just need to be careful not to lose it. This one's a little bit more exposed, so we'll go ahead and scrape at it, and this one, big plane to work with, I'm going to go ahead and scrape at that. We'll add a little bit of solder paste. This is 183 solder paste to help kind of tin those leads so that we have something to solder to. I'm going to go over them until I am satisfied with the amount of solder that I'm depositing on those traces. And we'll clean it up. Gonna grab some new pads here. I've got this pad repair kit. Got a couple little pads here that I would typically use on, say, an Xbox, but we can make them work for this Nintendo Switch as well. So let's grab 3 of them. One side is pure copper, the other side has this kind of reddish adhesive-like backing to it. We'll flip it over just so we have the copper side facing the joint, so we know that we have a good solder joint when we go and put heat on this, instead of it trying to eat through that sticky side. We'll push down with the iron and get it to stick to that little trace that's diving into the board there. Kind of bend it back into position. Get this to move around until it stays. That looks good, so we'll go ahead and cut off the excess on both the top and the bottom. We'll line it up with the others and slice it off gently without cutting into the board. Just like that. And we'll do the same with the following 2. We're going to go ahead and line up the pad. Solder the lead in place. When we're satisfied, we'll cut off the top and the bottom. Like that. And the same goes for this one. We'll line it up. Solder it in place. And we'll cut off the extra. Now this one's moved on me, so we're going to go ahead and tack it back in place. And I'm not quite confident in it, so I'm going to add some solder paste to it to help really make sure we get enough solder holding this down to that trace. Go ahead and cut off the bottom here, and you can see it's still moving. So let's add some solder paste to it so that we can really make sure that we've got a solid solder joint between the pad there and that trace. I got a little bit of 183 here. I'm just going to put down on there with the tip of my blade. I'll hold it in place with my tweezer and carefully go in and get that soldered down. There. It's finally looking like it's going to stay. That one, we'll touch it one more time. I don't think it's going anywhere. Yeah, you can feel it not moving at all when I push on it, at least up towards the top. Now we'll take our brush, clean up all of the. Now we'll take our brush and clean up all of the flux. drip some isopropyl alcohol on there and blow it away. This will hopefully help us remove all of the flux so that our UV mask has a really good surface to bond to. So here I've got my blue UV mask. I'm going to put a dot on each one of them. And I'm going to carefully move the UV mask around the perimeter of the pads so that we get some type of structure that's holding the pads from sliding left to right. And it's also covering up the small solder joint that is holding the pad to the trace. And we'll do that on all three of them. And that looks like we're doing good, so we'll cure it with the UV light. While this cures under UV light, let's switch back over to the Xbox so I can show you the process on that one. Now, in previous videos, I have shown how to repair the pads. For example, you can use a jumper solution where you install the HDMI prior to running the jumpers, and that works. However, with this case, having so many pads missing, this will be my preferred method. Alright, we'll grab the same pad repair kit. You can see these pads are much more like the originals on the Xbox compared to the Nintendo Switch, so we won't have to do any cutting on these. I'm going to go ahead and quickly line up all of them in a row. You can do one at a time if you'd like as far as adhering them, but I like to just get them all out in alignment. As you can see, the bottom side of them is flush with the board. The top kind of ramps up a little bit. We'll cut this one so that it fits a little bit better. Same with this last one. Want to make sure that the tails aren't interacting with each other and moving these around. We'll take some UV mask, and I'm just going to touch the tips of these because, like I said, the bottoms are flush with the board, the tops kind of ramp up away from it. So we don't want to cure those just yet, because otherwise we'll have a bulge at the end of them. Just getting the ends of them nice and covered with the UV mask, and we'll sop up the excess and we'll cure it with the UV light. Now that we have the UV mask curing at the bottom of those pads, let's switch back to the Switch and continue with it. Now let's scrape away the UV mask on top of the pads, and I'm going to try to get them to be the same size as the surrounding pads. This jumper is slightly bigger in pad width than the original ones, so we're going to try to keep it as close to the size of the other ones as possible so that when we deposit solder on it, it isn't too big. I'm going to go ahead and add some 183 solder paste to all of the pads, and we're going to carefully go around and fluff them all up with some solder, creating nice little solder pillows on each one of the pads. And I'm going to be extra careful on the 3 pads that I've formed so that I don't accidentally lift them off the board, because they are still not permanently attached. Even with the UV mask, they could still move around if I'm too aggressive with them. And after we do this, we should have even amount of solder on each one of the pads, including the 3 pads. We'll clean it up with some isopropyl alcohol and a microfiber cloth and a brush, and you can see it looks pretty decent. Put a little bit more solder on there, but that should make contact. In order to ensure that we make solid contact, I'm going to tin the pads on the new charging port. I'm going to add again some 183 solder paste here, Now this step isn't quite necessary if you're just doing a regular charge port repair. It does help, but you know, some people might think that it's a little extra. But I like to ensure that we have enough solder and that we've got good solid joints, so I'm going to go ahead and add some solder to each one of the pads on the underside of the charge port. We'll take our brush and clean off any of the excess solder paste so that we don't have any jumping between them, and we'll go ahead and install this on the logic board. We'll add some flux to all of the pads, and we'll slowly heat up the logic board so that we can install the charge port on it. Here, I'll line it up, and then we'll heat it up and push it down. We'll add some solder to the through holes and to secure the legs in place. I lost the footage for me soldering the actual pins, but as you'll see in a second, they are nice and solid. Go around and make sure all of those through holes get enough solder to go all the way through up into the other side. We want really strong legs, especially with the weak pads that are now on there. We'll clean up all of the flux. We'll flip it over and take a look at the other side. Got a little bit of a mess of flux on this side. So we'll go ahead and clean up all of that flux. Using some isopropyl alcohol and some air, we'll really get all of it off. And now here's your first look at those pins. You can see that the solder does travel up each one, makes good contact with each one of those legs. If they look like this on this front row, then they'll definitely look like that on the inside row as well. And I don't have enough solder coming through these back ones. There's more thermal mass in that area of the board. So let's go ahead and correct that real quick by adding some extra solder. Put a little bit of solder paste. There's also the 183. You could go up to a 217 if you wanted to here to make it extra strong, but we'll just go with the 183. And get that into the secure on the leg here so that we've got a nice strong joint. You don't have to use solder paste, you can also just use solder wire, but it's just what I have on hand right now, so that looks a lot better. Those two legs look good. Let's do the same on here without burning the battery connector here. We'll add a little bit of solder paste. We can always add more. Go ahead and pull up any of that solder that you can up and really get those legs secured. Still not enough to my liking, so we'll add even a little bit more, and we'll do it all over again. That looks much better. Now we'll go ahead and clean up all of the flux on both sides, making this nice and pretty once again. Alright, I'm going to take some Kapton tape. We're going to cover up all of the leads so that they compress down and stop ramping up the pads. We'll add UV mask to the entire top and really get all of the sides of these pads secured with UV mask so they don't want to shift left or right or short between the two of them. We'll hit it with a UV light. Once that's cured, I'm going to take some isopropyl alcohol to release the Kapton tape without pulling up the pads. And as you can see, we've got a bunch of joints that we need to make now. I'm going to clean up all of the area just so I can really get an idea of whether or not I have any issues with the bridging between them. And I'm going to take some time to really carefully go over and make sure we line up all of the jumpers, scraping away at the traces, making sure we make solid contact without jumping any of the connections between them. Making nice, solid, sturdy joints between the pads and the traces. We'll clean up the area as best we can so that we can add another layer of UV mask so that we can protect all of our hard work. You can see here all of the joints, nothing making contact. Some of these traces are really close together, so it's kind of hard to not make contact sometimes. Go ahead and tap them and make sure none of them are moving. They all look really solid. They all feel solid. They're not going anywhere. Making solid connection with the traces. We'll add some UV mask, and I put a little bit too much on here, but that's not a big deal. We can always wipe it away. Let's kind of move it around, get it to cover up all of the traces. There we go. Removed enough. I'm satisfied with that. Cure that with the UV light. And then we'll come back for the rest.
Now, while we let this cure, let's take a look at the HDMI that they tried to use in this failed attempt. And let's see if we can salvage it for this repair.
Alright, looking at this, we've got good HDMI on the inside. You can see there's a little bit of solder here and there. Looks like they tried to install it, but it's still in decent condition. Let's take a look at these pins. I'm going to add some flux. We'll pull away. Look at all these little jumpers that are coming off of these. I'm glad we are taking the time to clean these off. Didn't want any bridging that we couldn't potentially see. Now that we've got the pads all clean, let's go ahead and brush off all of the flux. We should be able to reuse this, no problem. Now we have to contend with the UV mask. So like with the Nintendo Switch, we could take our scalpel and carefully scrape away at the UV mask. This is a completely valid way to remove the UV mask and expose the pad that we've created to make a solid joint.
Now we could sit here and carefully scrape at the pads like I did on the Switch, but we could be here for a while. And I have a quicker, riskier solution, but for me it works. Let me show you what that is.
I'm going to take my grinder. We're going to carefully go at this nice and slowly, and we're going to grind away the UV mask I work nice and slowly. I've got a fairly steady hand for how shaky I can sometimes be, and I'm going to carefully work around this. Now, this is something that I'm willing to risk. You may not be willing to risk this, and that is completely fine. I'm just going to take my time to go over and really flatten this area out, getting down to the pads just enough to where I haven't cut through them, but enough that it's just going to make my life a lot easier when I go to really clean up the pads. Now scraping away the pads is a lot easier. I'm not contending with so much UV mask. It's completely flat across the entire way. This is going to make it so much easier for me to have a nice solid joint between them. I'm just going to take the time to really scrape away at all the UV mask that's covering up the pads. And that way we have nice solid joints. We'll clean up the area. And now we can dry fit or completely install our HDMI. The alignment looks good. Attack the legs, and now we can go in and tack each one of the pins. Now there's two different ways to do this. One is to use some solder paste, the other is some soldering wire. I'm going to show you both methods. So we'll do this half with solder paste, and we'll do the rest with some regular solder wire. They come in and we'll touch the pins. You can see that the paste automatically forms and helps create a solid joint between them. Sometimes some solder paste goes down into the channels there. It's not a big deal. We'll be able to take care of any loose solder. And here with a regular soldering wire, you can see that I can go around the pads and really get plenty of solder on each one of these pins, making solid contact with those pads. We'll add some flux to assist in the process. We'll go ahead and make sure all of these joints are really good. I've bridged these last two pins, so I'm going to take some wick and we'll suck up the solder on bridging those two. We'll clean up the flux, clean up any of the solder paste, make this look nice and pretty, nice and solid. And probably good at this point, but one thing that I like to do is add some more flux and go in with some hot air so that we can really flow and make sure all of those joints are nice and solid. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll clean it all up, really blow that out, add some flux along all of the pins. Come in with my hot air around 450 degrees because of the thermal mass in this board, and we'll heat it up nice and slowly, and we'll watch all of the solder start to melt and really form nice solid joints between the new formed pads and the pins. And here the legs, you can kind of see the solder coming up through the legs. So as we heat this up, this is a perfect opportunity to come in with a soldering iron and really secure the legs. So now that it's still nice and hot, take the soldering iron and we're going to really pull the solder up through these legs. You can see it melts there. Now we are sure that we've got a solid solder joint all the way up through the entire layers of the logic board. Clean up all of the flux, and this repair is good as done. Now, one thing you can do is go over each one of the pins and test them just to ensure that you have no bridging between them. And something else that I like to do is test each one of the pins just to make sure I got good readings. And I do. And now we can admire our work.
And there we go. These repairs are all done. Both of them are working once again. We have solid joints that should last a long time. Go ahead and like the video if you learned something. Leave a comment below if there's something you'd like to see in a future video. Thanks a ton for watching. We'll see you in the next video.